Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 67 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Well, we've been away for 2 weeks, and a lot has happened in that time, and it was really tough to decide what the topic of the evening should be. And I've decided to actually revisit a topic that I've discussed in fact, a couple of times during the course of the last 60 plus episodes of Humanity versus Insanity. And it's brought back to the fore by recent events in Belgium. And as is always the case, what is presented by the mainstream media might not necessarily actually be the case. Well, it's still early days, but it is remarkable how many inconsistencies there are in the mainstream media regarding the accounts of what occurred in Brussels last week. And invariably, we can always rely on one particular nation to come out with some apparently purely random statements. And I want to look at this particular country and the coincidences regarding this particular country and terror events that have occurred over the past few years. And I'm only going to go back really about 5 years. Almost exactly 5 years. Of course, we could go back a lot further. And this particular nation, I'm sure regular viewers will have already guessed that it's a nation based in the Middle East. And the statement that gave me, if you like, some cause for reflection was the statement made by Israel Katz. And he made the observation, the Israeli minister sparks backlash after saying Belgium should worry more about terror and less about eating chocolate, which seems a rather strange statement to make. He said they spend too much time eating chocolate and enjoying life. So it's not the freedoms that they lust after, it's the chocolate, apparently. Well, there are also some other statements made by Israeli ministers, including statements regarding concerns that Brussels was going to insist on labelling the origins of food, and particularly food coming from the occupied territories. And this may be more relevant than perhaps first meets the eye. So here we are. Let's take a look at some of the footage, or stills from the footage of that fateful day. And here we are, the two alleged perpetrators of the event on the left-hand side of the photograph there. And on the right, the man in white, the man that is still at large, but has been identified as a suspect. And so we have the two prime perpetrators, the guys that are on the left of that photograph. They are conveniently dead. And from the Metro, we have two suspects, one of whom is also dead. And then we have somebody else who is completely unknown. Well, there's another coincidence here that caught my eye. Well, actually, I must confess I went looking for it because, gasp of surprise, it's a common denominator. And here we are. This is the report that I stumbled across just a few days ago. Israeli security firms' advice on Brussels security unheeded. And the statement reads, the Belgian government some weeks ago hired an Israeli security firm to inspect security arrangements at the Zaventem airport of Brussels. The security experts, who were asked for advice on improvements, submitted initial recommendations for urgent upgrades. However, those improvements had not been installed by Tuesday, March 22nd, when Islamist terrorists hit the airport's departure hall with exploding suitcases, claiming more than 30 deaths and injuring scores of victims. Well, there's another statement here as well. After the attack, it turned out that Ukrainian security guards who had been hired and posted at the airport had mostly deserted their stations. The last few remaining there had carried out only cursory checks. One wonders if they had perhaps had a bit of a heads up. Well, as I said, I'm going to go back 5 years. And the common denominator here is Israeli security and the country concerned having previously made statements or decisions which rather upset the country that was providing the security. So let's start with Fukushima here. Of course, the official version of events is that the Fukushima nuclear reactor started to go haywire after it was hit by the tsunami, which was a result of the earthquake. Yet, interestingly, the footage from that day doesn't show the tsunami actually reaching the power station. Well, a journalist by the name of Jim Stone did some outstanding research in the immediate aftermath of Fukushima, and he drew the conclusion that we see in the pictures here on the screen, and he draws the makes the observation that the explosion of the reactor, the number 3 reactor, looks remarkably like a nuclear weapon test. Well, what is really quite remarkable is that an Israeli security firm had recently installed all the security monitoring and surveillance equipment around the Fukushima power station. So let's take a look at some statements made by the Japanese government in the months preceding the disaster at Fukushima, a disaster that is certainly going to leave a lasting legacy. The impact of the Fukushima disaster, of course, is the full force, is still to be felt, particularly along the west coast of the United States and Canada, but of course by the fish population in the Pacific Ocean. Well, let's start with this. This is on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. And look at the date here. Ironically, it's exactly 1 year prior to the Fukushima disaster. So March the 11th, 2010. And I know that print's a little bit small there, so let's take a look at that statement there. So 11th of March 2010, the statement from the government of Japan. The government deplores the decision of the government of Israel to give permission for the construction of 1,600 housing units in East Jerusalem, in addition to 112 units in the West Bank, just after the Israeli and Palestinian leadership's acceptance of the start of indirect talks. The government of Japan does not recognize any act that prejudges the final status of Jerusalem and the territories in the pre-1967 borders. Japan demands that the plans should not be implemented. Well, roll the clock forward to January 2011, and once again, ironically, precisely 2 months before the Fukushima disaster. And here's a statement again from the Japanese government. Japan condemns the demolishing of part of the Shepherd's Hotel in East Jerusalem with a view to constructing new housing units for Jewish people. Japan does not recognize any unilateral measures that prejudice the final resolution on pre-1967 borders, nor does Japan recognize the annexation of East Jerusalem by Israel. In this regard, Japan urges Israel to refrain from any unilateral act that could change the existing conditions of East Jerusalem. Well, about a month later, the UN voted on condemning Israeli settlements. And funnily enough, the United States, which of course the Israeli government certainly believe they control, and certainly, as we'll see later, if they don't control it, they certainly are pulling a few strings. And here's from Reuters. The United States on Friday vetoed a draft UN Security Council resolution condemning Israeli settlements on Palestinian territory after Palestinians refused to withdraw the Arab-drafted text. The other 14 council members voted in favor of the draft resolution, but the United States, as one of the 5 permanent council members with the power to block any action by the Security Council, voted against it. And as you see here, the date is February the 18th, 2011. Well, a couple of weeks later, the 28th of February, 2011, as a further report, Dr. Fayyad Nufumi Hashimoto, representative of Japan to the Palestinian Authority, signed a $32.5 million agreement for the project of treating the wastewater in Jericho. Dr. Fayyad pointed out that this important, vital and strategic project falls under the Palestinian Authority's plan that aims at the establishment of the institutions of the State of Palestine and its infrastructure. It also comes in concordance with the strategy set by the Japanese government to support the PNA in the fields of development and improvement of the infrastructure and enhancement of the ability of the PNA to offer services not only in terms of infrastructure, but in diverse social, educational and other domains. He said, ever since its establishment, Japan has offered the PNA more than $1.1 billion. Well, the state of Israel, of course, does not see that as a benign act. It sees it as an act of aggression. And then just 3 days before the Fukushima disaster, on the 8th of March 2011, in Hebron, a handover ceremony today between Japan and the United Nations World Food Programme marks Japan's continued commitment to provide food assistance to the poorest of the poor in the West Bank occupied Palestinian territory. Japan's contribution of $3.1 million comes in support of the Palestinian Authority Ministry of Social Affairs Social Safety Net Reform Plan. And the report continues. The Japanese government is determined to continue its support to the Palestinian people, said Mr. Naofumi Hashimoto, representative of Japan to the Palestinian National Authority. This support comes from a human security perspective, as well as its political stand for the Palestinian efforts to establish a viable, independent Palestinian state and to develop the capacities of governmental and local institutions in providing basic daily services to people. Well, that sounds like humanity taking precedence over insanity. But sadly, of course, the Zionist state of Israel does not recognize humane treatment. It is a rogue state. And consider it a possibility, and I'm certainly not the only one, that Japan suffered an attack at the hands of the Israeli security services. And in fact, this is also the opinion which was expressed shortly after the disaster by the former editor of the Japan Times Weekly. And Yoichi Shimatsu, the former editor of Japan Times Weekly, a Japanese national newspaper, says the US and Israel knew Fukushima had weapons-grade uranium and plutonium that were exposed to the atmosphere after a massive tsunami wave hit the reactor. And he continued, he said, second, he contends that Israeli intelligence sabotaged the reactor in retaliation for Japan's support of an independent Palestinian state. Well, I think we're, those of us who are able to see beyond the veneer that is presented by the mainstream media will certainly be looking for these coincidences. Now, the only people who know what happened are those that perpetrated the event. But the coincidences, unfortunately, continue elsewhere. And there's another factor here as well that may have, caused Israel to take this action. And that was on February the 24th of 2011. Japan had offered to enrich uranium for Iran. So how could they have perpetrated this event? Well, first of all, obviously, it could have been through the security and surveillance equipment that had been installed in the reactor. But it could, of course, also have been attributed to Stuxnet, the Stuxnet virus. Now, this is a virus that was developed by the US security services primarily to target Iranian reactors. Now, one of the things about Stuxnet is that it is specifically designed to target the Siemens control systems. These are the Siemens nuclear power station control systems that are manufactured in Germany and were then installed in the reactors in Iran and, coincidentally, at Fukushima. Well, perhaps the first clue that the security services and indeed the government in Germany considered this to be a possibility was the German government's announcement, literally just 4 days after the Fukushima disaster, that it was going to shut down all its power plants. So in the immediate aftermath of Fukushima, Germany temporarily shut down 7 of its nuclear reactors while it considered its nuclear strategy. Chancellor Angela Merkel said that all reactors operational before 1980 would be taken offline and safety checks carried out on the remaining plant. The move comes after concerns about radiation leaks at a Japanese plant after last Friday's earthquake. Now, call it a hunch, but German engineering is very highly regarded, despite the recent Volkswagen deception on exhaust emissions. But nonetheless, why would Germany look to be shutting down its nuclear program based on an event that had been triggered in Japan, supposedly by an earthquake-triggered tsunami? Well, maybe it actually relates to the fact that the German nuclear plants all had Siemens, understandably, home-manufactured control systems. And at the end of May in 2011, Angela Merkel stated a decision to phase out nuclear power by 2022 can make her country a trailblazer in renewable energy. Mrs. Merkel said Germany would reap economic benefits from the move. Germany is the biggest industrial power to renounce nuclear energy. Now, this is a truly remarkable decision. It's certainly a laudable decision, but truly remarkable on the back of what had occurred in Japan, until one acknowledges that the Stuxnet worm was a very specific virus that had been designed to target Siemens controllers. Now, on the basis that it appeared, possibly to the German security services and now to the German government, that it was a Stuxnet-triggered event, then Germany certainly did not want to open itself up to similar attacks. And Germany would have known that, of course, the attack was not unleashed by the US, but obviously by another nation that had managed to get its hands on the Stuxnet virus. So here's the extent of Germany's nuclear power, as you can see there. I mean, of course, all either on the seaboard or on the major river system. And now they're all to be decommissioned over the next few years. Well, now, I have a lot of respect for the German security services. They're very much on the ball, and I certainly monitor anything that comes out of the German security services. And in fact, it was the German security services in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 that led to the hypothesis of the possibility that the planes had been hijacked remotely. And of course, one of the links here is Rabbi Dov Zakheim, who was the comptroller reporting directly into Donald Rumsfeld for the Pentagon. And he was the guy who advised his boss, Donald Rumsfeld, that he couldn't account for $2.3 trillion of Pentagon funds. an observation that Donald Rumsfeld made to the US national press on September the 10th of 2001, the day before 9/11. Well, Dolph Zackheim was also the director of a company that manufactured remote control systems. And the German cabinet minister of technology, Andreas von Bülow, he made a statement about it 5 months or so, 4 months after 9/11. And he said that he was concerned about the official brainwashing on the September 11th issue. And in a full-page interview with the Sunday edition of the Berlin Tagesspiegel Daily, former German Minister of Technology Andreas von Bülow said he does not buy any of the official theories that have been presented to date on the events of 9/11. The apparent failure of the US administration, including its 26 secret agencies with an annual budget of $30 billion, to come up with any convincing assessment, was one big problem that von Bülow addressed in quite some detail. He then addressed the role of the official brainwashing of the Western mass democracies on the September 11th issue in promoting the new enemy image of Islamic terrorism, along lines developed earlier by senior advisors in the US administration. Now, bear in mind that this is an interview that was conducted over the weekend of the 15th, 16th of January 2002. Now, a little over 18 months later, Michael Meacher, who was the former Minister for the Environment in the UK, he gave an interview to The Guardian. And this interview was run, I believe it was in the first week of September 2003, where Michael Meacher made very similar observations to Andreas von Bülow. And Michael Meacher tried to raise these issues in Parliament, questioning the official version of events, claiming that really they did not stand up to scrutiny. Well, Michael Meacher, of course, a couple of years later, tried to host a screening of the film Loose Change in Parliament, but that was effectively shut down just a couple of days before it was due to be screened. Well, obviously, Germany wasn't going to get away with giving the game away on Fukushima. Now, of course, it had only given the game away to those who know how the game is played. To the vast majority of people, to the 96% of people who live in effective slavery and really don't look beyond what they see or read in the mainstream, i.e. the 96% of the population plus that don't watch Humanity vs. Insanity, the 3% who do would have surely taken an interest in subsequent events. But maybe they passed them by, because what happened in the immediate aftermath of Germany's statement that it was going to abolish its nuclear power program, in May, remember this, 10 die from E. coli infected cucumbers. And this was from the BBC. The death toll in Germany from an outbreak of E. coli caused by infected cucumbers has risen to at least 10. And, this was the new global pandemic. This E. coli was going to ravage the world after, of course, it had ravaged Europe. Well, in the early days of June, it was decided, actually, it wasn't cucumbers, it was bean sprouts. And here we have the BBC article again from the 10th of June. The German tests link bean sprouts to deadly E. coli. New data released in Germany strongly suggests that locally produced bean sprouts, as suspected, the source of the deadly E. coli outbreak. Officials initially blamed the E. coli, which has killed 29 people, on imported cucumbers, then bean sprouts. In another development, Russia agreed to lift its ban on imports of EU fresh vegetables in return for certain guarantees. The Russian ban had compounded a crisis for EU vegetable growers, with Spanish cucumbers producers being wrongly blamed for the contamination. Well, this was in the media every day through the latter days of May 2011 and the first couple of weeks of June. And there were reported cases of E. coli in the UK, in Scandinavia, and then mysteriously it just disappeared. It evaporated like the E. coli outbreak had never happened. So what occurred in the meantime? Well, needless to say, German engineering expertise or scientific expertise came into play, and the Koch laboratories in Germany had done some analysis, and they were able to identify that the strain of E. coli was bioengineered. It was not a naturally occurring virus. So who has the technology to bioengineer an E. coli virus? Because scientists at the Robert Koch Institute discovered that this strain of E. coli is resistant to penicillin, tetracycline, nialidic acid, etc., etc. In the simplest terms, the E. coli was exposed to each antibiotic, and those that were resistant were then exposed to the next antibiotic, and so on until a super bioweapon was created. So who could possibly create this super bioweapon? Well, basically there are 3 countries that certainly have the technology to do this. The USA, the UK, and yes, you've guessed it, Israel. So was this a bit of retribution for Germany giving the game away as to what had occurred at Fukushima via Stuxnet? And was an agreement reached that Germany would play down its decommissioning of its nuclear program in return for the vaccine or whatever the antidote is to this bioengineered E. coli? We know that these rogue states and rogue elements within the other states are just looking for an opportunity to unleash this insanity on humanity. So, and it doesn't really stop there, because, I mean, let's sort of continue, and we continue through into 2011. And in July of the same year, of course, we have Norway's 9/11. So this was the back end of July, and this was supposedly the lone gunman, Andreas Breivik, who set off this bomb in Oslo before unleashing his terror on an island of, I think it was socialist youth, on a camp there. And here was the question that was being asked almost immediately: why Norway? Well, why Norway indeed? Because maybe, once again, there is more to this than meets the eye. So let's take a look at, why Norway, because there are once again some common denominators here between Norway and Japan. Number one, Norway has endorsed Palestinian statehood. Norway had announced that it was going to withdraw from Libya. It was going to withdraw from the nations that were attacking Libya and Gaddafi as of the 1st of August 2011. This was about 10 days or so after the lone gunman attacks. And number three, Norway has withdrawn investment funding from Israeli firms involved in developing West Bank statements. And the bottom line is here that the government or rogue elements within their security services, who may or may not be directly connected with the government, but the government doesn't seem to be too concerned about stopping them, will unleash their terror on any country that has the audacity to challenge their genocidal agenda, particularly if they challenge it at the UN. Well, of course, Breivik was the new blue-eyed blonde version, and a quick search of the web, and I discovered this: the there were various videos. Funnily enough, they are a bit difficult to find these days. But from 2008, the new Al-Qaeda blonde-haired, blue-eyed Westerners. Well, you know, why am I not surprised? Obviously, this is the conditioning that is put out there, you know, to prepare us for the fact that the Islamic terrorists or the national terrorists operating on behalf of the rogue state of Israel may actually not be whom we are generally led to believe. Well, let's just consider that within Mossad, you know, we have a Mossad press release, and actually, ironically, coincidentally, this is a press release that was put out the day before 9/11. And this was attributed to the US Army's School of Advanced Military Studies. And this was published in the Washington Times the day before 9/11. And in this article, it said, Mossad are ruthless and cunning, having the capability to target US forces and make it look like a Palestinian Arab act. Well, it's not just targeting US forces. Basically, Mossad operate with absolute impunity. And I don't think there can be very much doubt that Mossad also has control of rogue elements within the security services or within the governments of probably most countries around the world. You know, we know very well that you know, they target people through blackmail primarily, through honey traps, through bribery. And one book actually I would recommend is By Way of Deception. And this book was written by Victor Ostrovsky from after he had, I think he defected to Canada. But the book was published, I think, in 1992. But an outstanding read and some serious insights into the methodology of Mossad. Now, of course, the reality is that anybody who dares to criticize Israel generally comes under immediate attack and demonization. And this is their standard operating procedure. But they acknowledge this. They're open about it. It's open secret. And what could be better than to listen to the words of the former Israeli minister, Shalomit Aloni. So take a listen to this from her interview on Democracy Now!
Yours is a voice of criticism we don't often hear in the United States. Often when there is dissent expressed in the United States against policies of the Israeli government, people here are called anti-Semitic. What is your response to that as an Israeli Jew?
Well, it's a trick. We always use it. When from Europe somebody is criticizing Israel, then we bring up the Holocaust. When in this country people are criticizing Israel, then there are anti-Semitic. And the organization is strong and has a lot of money, and the ties between Israel and the American Jewish establishment are very strong, and they are strong in this country. As you know, they have power, which it's okay. They are talented people, and they have power, money, and media, and other things. And their attitude is Israel, my country, right or wrong, the identification. And they are not ready to hear criticism. And it's very easy to blame people who criticize certain acts of the Israeli government as anti-Semitics, and to bring up the Holocaust and the suffering of the Jewish people, and that justify everything we do to the Palestinians.
So there you have it, straight from the horse's mouth, as it were. You know, if you're in the US, they play the anti-Semitic card. If you're in Europe, they play the Holocaust denial card. And as you heard her say, they are some very smart, very able, very powerful people. And they pull together. And in the US, In the US, they are known as AIPAC, the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, America's pro-Israel lobby. Now, interestingly, I think it was under Clinton, some legislation was established which limited the amount of money that a public affairs committee could donate to any politician, except one. And there were no constraints on how much AIPAC could actually pay to the politicians in its pocket. And if we look, every single politician in the US sucks up to AIPAC. I mean, it's not just Obama. It's pretty much everybody who's anybody. You know, Bush, Cheney, Hillary, Obama. On the bottom there, John Bolton from Rebuilding America's Defenses, PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, the neoconservative body. And in fact, John Bolton, I believe it was John Bolton, that chaired the committee that produced the report, Rebuilding America's Defenses, which was published in September of 2000, exactly 1 year before 9/11. And you can find this document online in PDF format. And please do take a look, because anyone who really still thinks that everything that's happening around the world is random, read that document. It's now, 15 and a half years old. And you'll find that it's effectively the script for everything that is unfolding. Well, here's the mission statement of AIPAC, America's pro-Israel lobby. AIPAC's mission is to strengthen the ties between the United States and its ally, Israel. As America's leading pro-Israel lobby, AIPAC works with Democrats, Republicans, and independents to enact public policy that enhances the US-Israel relationship. AIPAC's staff and citizen activists educate decision makers about the bonds that unite the United States and Israel, and how it is in America's best interests to help ensure that the Jewish state is safe, strong, and secure. For those interested in politics, there's no better place to get involved than AIPAC. Well, hot off the press, and this is actually from Fox News, and this appeared earlier today. So this is March 29th, 2016. And this is Fox News. You can't make it up. The UN names democratic Israel as world's top human rights violator. Well, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to actually work out who provides much of Fox funding. Of course, it's Rupert Murdoch, the arch-Zionist himself. And, of course, the Murdoch media, the Zionist media, ensures that the pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli message is perpetrated in mainstream media throughout the world. But not everybody buys in, and not least the members of the Jewish faith themselves. And as Rudolf Steiner said 100 years ago, the Zionist is not the friend of the Jew. And the Zionists hide behind the Jewish people. The Jewish people effectively provide a shield for the socio-psychopathic, genocidal Zionist agenda. And if we look at this chart from 2015, this is from the UN, and what we're looking at here is the countries that asylum seekers from Israel migrate towards. And as you can see, the bulk go to the USA and, interestingly, Sweden. The next country that they migrate to is Canada, and then after that, Australia and Germany. So there are a number of members of the Jewish faith that certainly do not support in any way, shape or form the Zionist agenda. And this from New York. I think this was either this weekend or the previous weekend. And 50,000 Orthodox Jews take over 10 blocks of New York in protest over Israeli army plan to draft devoutly religious men. Well, actually, my inside track is that it wasn't just about that. This is a protest against the Zionist government agenda, hegemonic agenda. So, well, what can I say? obviously, it's a case of do your own research. Don't take anything that I've said as gospel truth. I don't suggest for one moment that I have the definitive version of anything. I'm purely pointing out the remarkable coincidences between countries that appear to have upset the sensitivities of the rogue state, the rogue Zionist state of Israel, and to have some kind of retribution unleashed upon them to let them know what will happen if they continue with their opposition. So please do take a look. Things are still unfolding in Brussels, but call it a hunch. But the EU is critical of the state of Israel, of the genocidal agenda, and of course those who wish to perpetrate the increasing unrest within Europe will hide behind either the Muslims or whomever it is that they want to demonize at that particular juncture. Do not take anything at face value. Well, in the last few minutes of tonight's show, I want to change the subject and just draw your attention, not that it probably needs drawing towards, but a new film that is about to be released, and the film is called Vaxxed, From Cover-Up to Catastrophe. And the film has been produced by none other than Dr. Andrew Wakefield, of course, which the Orthodox medical community have dismissed as a rogue practitioner and tried to dismiss his research, despite the fact that his claims are, of course, vehemently denied, but the evidence would suggest that actually he might have actually got a point. Well, his film was due to be shown at an event that is actually the brainchild of Robert De Niro. And this is the Tribeca Film Festival. Now, up until a few days ago, I doubt that very many people had ever heard of the Tribeca Film Festival. And certainly very, very few people had heard of the film Vaxxed. Well, of course, the Orthodox medical community were doing everything they possibly could to demonize Robert De Niro and question the sanity in his decision of including the film at his film festival. And he has now, I believe, withdrawn the film from the film festival. And InfoWars put this spin on it: the vaccine film that Robert De Niro won't let his audience see. That's showbiz, where the stars are co-opted on a daily basis. And if they move off the dime, they're attacked in the press. Well, actually, I don't think that's the case at all. I think that what Robert De Niro has done is an absolute masterstroke in terms of raising awareness of both the film festival and, not least, Vaxxed. And of course, Robert De Niro does have a particular interest, because this is the statement that he has released. He said, "Grace and I have a child with autism, and we believe it is critical that all of the issues surrounding the causes of autism be openly discussed and examined." And he obviously is not alone, because there are an increasing number of people who are concerned. And, this statistic is bandied around, but this is autism by numbers, and this is referring particularly to the United States, where it was estimated that in 1970, just, 45 years ago, 46 years ago, 1 in 10,000 children were diagnosed with autism. By 2013, it was 1 in 50. And, it's estimated that, by the year 2030, it's going to be basically 1 in 2. So if this isn't genetic engineering, I don't know what is. Well, I haven't seen the film yet. I'm really looking forward to see the film. I wish to goodness that I could invite Dr. Andrew Wakefield to speak at an Alternative View event. But funnily enough, he's not too keen to come back into the UK anytime soon, and I quite understand that. Well, continuing on with this theme, one of my AV7 speakers will be joining us next week. That's Dr. Graham Downing. And he'll be expressing his opinions on what's going on with the film Vaxxed and his thoughts on the MMR and other vaccinations that are being foisted upon our children. So I'm going to play you out tonight with the promo video for the AV7 conference. There are just 30 rooms left. So it's looking to be an absolutely fantastic event, a meeting of like minds. And so here's the promo, and I'll see you next Monday with Dr. Graham Downing.
The Alternative View Conference presents AV7 Humanity Rising. Speakers include Ian R. Crane, Thomas Sheridan, Patrick Henningsen, Max Egan, Zen Gardner, Dr. Graham Downing, Willem Felderhoff, Field McConnell, Vanessa Beeley, Michael Shrimpton, Fiona Burns. 13th to the 15th of May 2016, Horwood House, near Milton Keynes. Book online at alternativeview.co.uk or call 0207 558 8869. AV7, bringing together some of the most inspirational agents of real change.
Honestly, I've spoken at a lot of gigs, and I'd say this is the best gig that I've spoken at, just because of the lineup of speakers.